So yes, thank you, Claire, for joining us tonight. This is an interesting one, and as I said in my coaching WhatsApp group, I think some of my proudest moments as an endurance coach aren't necessarily the sporting performances, but it's when athletes have taken those lessons that we've used in sport and applied them to other areas of life, and seeing how they've grown in other areas of life. And that genuinely is, some of my proudest moments as an endurance coach. And that is very much the world that you live in, Claire. So that's why I'm very keen to get you involved with the wider HP3 community and really take those lessons and how you are applying that in other areas of life, particularly around the sort of business and personal development. So I'm going to hand over to Claire tonight, and she's going to talk us through what she does, and then what we can maybe learn from that, and how we can see how these lessons that we're using in our endurance sport can apply elsewhere. So Claire, over to you.
Super. Thank you very much. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't feeling the pressure, no pun intended. I mean, to use my own, excitement is just, no, fear is just excitement without the breath, is a phrase we often use in leadership. So yeah, thanks so much if you join me. If you're watching back, or I should say us, that's very egotistical. Thanks very much for joining us. If you're watching back or if you're with us live. I've got a few things to offer this evening, sort of following the format, as Tim says, of I'm new to HP3. So a little bit about me, who I am, how I got here to some of this thinking, and then sort of bringing together some of these aspects that create what I call my endurance mindset framework, pulling on a few of those threads, also the outdoor aspects, and then some models, some tactics, which some of you I'm sure will be really au fait with, but thinking about how those really dovetail together. And actually having joined a couple of your sessions already, especially around burnout, thinking about what those synergies are, as Tim says, between the lessons we learn in sport, but also how we take those into building our businesses, and particularly in my world, how they show up when we're thinking about how we develop our leadership practice. So I'm just going to do the awkward. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, which was working a minute ago. And you should all now be able to see that. And now I need to remember how to move between it again. So this is me. I have a couple of guises. I suspect Ed usually likes the one that's top picture there, where I'm looking a bit beaten up, quite frankly. I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, and I also do some specific learning. In essence, I like to think, I hope, I enable people to be reflective, resourceful, and resilient. And that's a part of my 3R models, which lives in that endurance mindset framework. So as an exec coach, I support mainly managers upwards, currently working with several people in leadership positions, and often they are in challenge or change, or also transition, and similarly for business owners. I also do some team development, so that's bringing exec teams and quite often trustee boards together to think about how they're really going to be, for want of a better term. So how are they best able to communicate, collaborate, really hear each other, and as a part of that then make decisions about how they're going to do what they need to in a way that's most impactful. And then I do some specific learning, particularly around what we're going to explore a bit tonight. And sometimes, if I'm really lucky, people let me speak about things a bit like this. So yeah, that's a bit about me. And what I have found as an audience, you're slightly different compared to sort of my organisational business settings. But storytelling can be really key to helping people understand what those foundations of an endurance mindset are, and getting people to really embody particularly those outdoor spaces as a part of that, so that they can experience that kind of feeling of something bigger than them, perspective, the feeling of fresh air, and especially when we're thinking about aspects such as stress. I don't know how to move my screen again. So some of this came from a talk that I did a while ago called I'm Clare Walkerdon and I Can Do Hard Things. And this was kind of a big moment for me. I tripped and fell into doing endurance sport a few years back. None of it was really very intentional, and a lot of it wasn't really performance related. But I realized that my real skill was in understanding my tenacity, and as a part of that, understanding what my core persona was, my traits, my wants in how I communicate, how I plan, etc. All the stuff that we might think about and talk about, particularly in an organizational setting, and particularly when we think about how we upskill leaders. So that got me to thinking as I progressed through building a business, running a business, the iterations of that. And then as I've got older and stuff that's changed in my body and things I've had to get my head around, it's kind of developed into I can still do hard things. But a part of that has been that adaptation and that thinking about what can I control? What's changed? How am I going to be agile? What does success look like for me now? I won't bang on about things I've done. I'll be honest, in this arena with you guys, I feel like they're probably not the epitome of performance, but I have done long distance triathlon, a bit of long distance running, not enough probably in Ed's mind, and most recently long distance self-supported cycling, and particularly off-road and in some places that aren't so accessible. And that's the stuff that really gets me going. But that's not just what's hard about life. We still have businesses to run, relationships to hold together. Starting new things in our business is equally as hard, pushing into new markets, etc. So that's a potted history, I suppose, of where this thinking came from. And it also came from working for want of a better term, a global wellbeing platform as an associate in the past sort of 3 years, and looking at really how we're living in these unbelievably fast-paced, multifaceted environments in life and business. We are being subjected to a level of noise that we're simply not supposed to be, and the number of things that we can, should, or might do in any one day. And as a part of that, we are under increased and not least sustained stress. And we know from the statistics that I won't go into because some of them are honestly getting a bit worrying, that we have an incredibly high precedence of mental unwellness, not least in the UK now. And we have this need, especially in a very changeable climate, and not least in the UK, where we have quite an unstable financial climate at the minute. We need people to perform, and we need them to endure, particularly in a workplace setting, and particularly for our managers who are really feeling the stress and the strain of that burnout. They're needing to do that for themselves, but then they're also needing to enact that for those in their team, recognize what's going on for them. So my thinking began to percolate around this in the last few years in particular. And then last year, when I was having a bit of a turning point in the business and a bit of a turning point as a 44-year-old woman, I was thinking about, why am I not doing the things that I did? Is it that I don't want to do them? Is it that I can't do them? And if it is that I can't do them or I don't want to, why did I do them in the first place? And that got me thinking about grit. And something that really stood out for me from Angela Duckworth's work was this skill times effort equals achievement. And particularly in the leadership space, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to upskill team members. We're putting them through this framework, this system organizationally. So we're upskilling them. And then we're asking them to apply their effort, their love, their care, their attention, all of those skills on a daily basis. And that effort counts twice. And that made me think, well, if we have such a high level of mental unwellness and we have such a high level of burnout, how is it that if we can't enact effort, we can actually access the skills that we're giving people that are the very things they need in order to access the achievement? And that rang a little alarm bell, because what I realized was that I couldn't quite achieve what I used to. And as a part of that, that was affecting my purpose. And as a part of that, that was affecting my identity. And that made me think about Dilt's logical levels, which we'll come on to in a bit. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour and a bit of a vulnerable share, I suppose, about, what have I gone through to think about this? But it also made me reflect on something I was hearing more and more in my coachees, and particularly those who were transitioning out. And that's that question of, who am I when? And I think there's two sides to that in sport in particular, in my experiences. Who am I when I achieve, and who am I when I don't achieve in the way that I thought I might or I used to? So really being able to think about, I've put all the effort in, what is the reality around what that success is going to look like, but more importantly, what might it feel like? I'm really sorry, that's my doorbell. I have no idea who that is. So really quickly, because I'm not here to sell this to you, but very open to questions. This is a very high level version of my endurance mindset framework. And what I got thinking about was, okay, so we have the performance cycle. And quite often in organizational settings, we know that the language of high performing sport lands well when we're thinking about high performing teams. And that's great. But if we go back to our skill times effort equals achievement, where are we going to get the gaps in that? So if we have people who are so burnt out and they're not able to collaborate and they're not able to communicate, how can they even actually get themselves in a place of preparation? And therefore, if we're measuring performance, what are we actually measuring? So I thought about the aspects that I was most often asked to cover when I was delivering in this space of well-being or people development, and what I most heard from coachees, and came up with these 6 areas that kind of seek to fill that space in between. And the first one is super simple. It's the fundamentals of well-being. There are 5 of them. They won't be new to anybody, but to my horror, I saw time and time again that they're the very basics that people just forget or can't access when they get super busy or super stressed. So sleep, nutrition, movement, connection, and routine. And I was actually on a call with somebody today, and I went through them, and he said, oh, my routine. And he said, without my routine, I just don't have a purpose, because actually so many of his anchors in his day are attached to why he gets up and he gets going. So our fundamentals of well-being live in those 5 spaces. What does it all mean is thinking about that, who am I when? Why did I want to do it? What is it that drives me, etc. Closing our knowing and doing gap we'll look at really briefly in a bit, but it's that space between sometimes even when we have all the skill or we have all the knowledge, for some reason we won't cross the gap. Now that could be that effort piece, but it could also be, in a lot of cases, I tend to find the fear. I'll be seen, I'll be known, I'll be heard, etc. So how do we close that gap? Sometimes we jump across it and then go back again. It's a bit like if you've ever looked at Kubler-Ross's change curve, you can quite often get what we call the Tarzan swing. So people sort of go and try it out and then they come back again until they drop over and they're ready. So then keeping it real and in control, how are we really able to evidence? Because particularly when we're stressed, we start to tell ourselves those stories that show up in the knowing and doing gap. So is it really real that I can't achieve this? Is it a self-limiting belief? Is it something that's a transference from a family member? Or if I'm in an organizational environment, what's keeping me in a place that doesn't feel like we can move forward? And in terms of control, what's my tolerance for risk? What's my appetite for it? So we'll touch briefly in a bit on knowing our preferences, whether that's DISC or Insight or Myers-Briggs or whatever you're using. I use DISC because of the stress profiling. But understanding who we are and therefore what our appetite for risk is can be really key. Getting uncomfortable with being uncomfortable is the same. So we all know, probably in this room more than most that I speak to, that there are going to be times when it's uncomfortable. But it's about understanding in that driver of where do I want to get to, what's the struggle worth? What am I struggling for? And therefore, am I willing to sit with it? The problem we see in organizations is this kind of perpetual, we're all just struggling together, but we don't really know what we're fighting for, either because the end goal isn't clear, or often we've got change fatigue. So if we're going through these kind of churn of transformation, that becomes really challenging for people to keep up with. And then, no surprise to you, if we perform, we then need to rest. So again, in those periods of transformation and change organizationally, we need a break from it. We can't simply keep just going and going. And then, as a part of that evidencing piece again, how are we going to review that so we can tell ourselves what worked and what didn't? I'm just going to take a pause and hope the person's gone away from my door. Does anybody have any questions so far? If not, I'll just keep moving.
No, that's all good from my side.
Super. It's just an excuse to have a sip of tea, if I'm honest. So in essence, I'm really interested in this interplay between this bucket of things we call well-being, that's getting a really bad rep, quite frankly. This piece around resilience, which I can see going the wrong way as well in the work environment, because everybody suddenly realised we need it, but nobody quite knows what it is. And all the way through to grit, and I put performance in grit. So I feel like we're asking people in the world to be really gritty, but we're not giving them the real fundamentals of understanding how to keep themselves in a place of well-being, how to have the skills to access that, and actually that you can't just throw yourself at it. But hopefully not. So I kind of move around inside this framework, whether I'm working with individual coaches, whether I'm working organisationally, and it's becoming something that pretty much gets picked up every day in what I do now. I call it a framework because I want it to be agile, and also it's growing with my thinking and with my experience and what I learn from the people who I work with. But I want it to promote personal development. Specifically, it comes with that leadership piece, but that doesn't have to be organisational. We have to lead ourselves, and we have to increase our well-being as a part of that. And in increasing our awareness and our mindset, particularly around our behaviours, we're able to access better choices sooner. And as a part of that, we hopefully get better solutions thinking, collaboration and communication. And what really made me think about bringing that together with endurance sport was that sustainable momentum. So my only skill really is that I can go really slowly for really long periods of time. And I'm also quite sneaky about when I go to bed by comparison to other people. That's a different piece of the puzzle. But most people will say that I have an ability, whether it's a performance ability or not, but it is an ability nonetheless to know myself and to know how to manage myself in mind and body. And I believe if we can do that for ourselves and we can do that organisationally, then we can perform better and we can have better lives as a part of it. So, as I say, specifically lately, there's a lot of chat around this thing we call resilience. It's definitely coming to the fore. I think it's taking over somewhat from some of the mental health type messaging, but it's in a position where it's possibly going to get a bit skewed in some cases. So I quite like this statement about it because I think it covers all the bases, and that is that it has to have a process. So resilience is rarely random. The narrative that we can just keep pushing through, or we'll just keep, running at the wall, or we just keep getting up every day. We need to have a process behind it. And the outcome of that is that we're more able to have this ability to adapt. We're able to be more agile, and particularly in difficult or challenging life experiences. And for lots of us at the minute, day-to-day life has moved into that difficult or challenging experience, whether it's something we feel in control of or not. So I'd be really interested, actually, what does resilience mean to you? And by that, I mean, what does it feel like and how does it show up? Does anybody want to feel they can share that?
Well, I mean, I don't know how it does show up, but for me, it is a lot about showing up in the morning. You just, you get your stuff done. There are a lot of days where that is super easy, but there are also many days where it's not so easy. And I think the real challenge is showing up on the days when it's not easy. So that for me is a big part of resilience.
Nice. I really like, the phrase showing up. There's a difference, isn't there, on whether we're just turning up or whether we're showing up. It's like we bring our whole selves to it, and we can still get up, but when we get up with an ease and everything's not just like a big drag, we hear people say things like it's like walking through treacle. So we have more of a lightness to us. We have an energy, etc. Brilliant. Anybody else?
Yeah, for me, I think there's a lot of resilience in how quickly you bounce back from the stress or under stress, kind of the recovery piece. I think the stressor, kind of like in training, when we're going to bring that into it, is the thing that life throws at you in the situation, and the resilience piece is actually how quickly. And if your recovery time is longer than the amount of stress that you're under, then that's obviously past the point of resilience. And I think building that capacity for recovery is how I kind of think about it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So whether we're taking out because we're doing sport, or we're taking out because we're running a business, or we're running a team, or any of those things, it's about that capacity that we have. We can't just keep giving and giving and giving. I quite often hear phrases like, I feel like someone's taking chunks out of me, or I feel like someone's taking pieces. And when we get to that phase, it's not just about taking physical time or resource. It's that real feeling of someone is physically taking something else from you, whether that's energetic or it's bits of you don't necessarily want to give. So it becomes really hard for us to perform in that space. So I don't know who made this up. I think it was me, but I adapted it today. So it's definitely mine now. Resilience isn't about always pushing through. It's about creating these conditions to thrive in. And so going back to our framework, those conditions may not always be linear, but to create that capacity, which I think it was Zach just eloquently talked about, we have to have a set of conditions that we can kind of keep that helicopter view of, that watching brief. And that's what helps us build that. I've added always in here because I'm aware this evening, talking to a group of people who do what we do, sometimes we're going to push through. It seemed trite to come on here and say, oh, well, if you've had enough, it's okay to give up, because it's a slightly different audience. What we're trying to move away from, or what I'm trying to move away from organisationally, is that we can't just keep on this kind of conveyor belt system. But what it is definitely about is creating those conditions that we can thrive in. Thrive's an interesting word. I think it is actually a part of the World Health Organization's definition of what well-being is, though. So I'm pretty sure that's where I pulled it out from. So another question quickly. Sorry, you didn't know you're going to be dragged into this evening. Does that mean if we're resilient, everything is easier? And Alan, you touched on that slightly. You said, I'm more easily able to get up in the morning. if we have more of this resilience, is everything just easy?
I'm going to jump in there. No, it's not easy. You used the word capacity before, and I like that in terms of thinking about resilience as almost like this bucket where there's all these stresses that are coming in. And
Yeah,
obviously, the bigger your bucket, the more of that you can absorb, but it's still stress. So it's not easy. But if the bucket overflows, that's where things start to go wrong. So have you then got the other things that are then taking the stress away? So have you got the downtime and the recovery? And that's, again, where a lot of the narrative is moving towards, isn't it? That it's not this continual pushing through, like you said, but giving yourself the space to then recover from that. And maybe empty the bucket out a little bit. But it still doesn't change the fact that what's going in is hard.
Yeah, great. And so important to recognize, right? So quite often the narrative I see in well-being is that, we just need to make everybody well, or we need to remove mental health. It'd be really quite dangerous if we remove mental health. And similarly with stress, we need people to not be stressed. Well, stress is a reaction. It's there for a good reason, right? It's there to keep us safe. It's there to tell us that something's happening. So yeah, I think absolutely right. And hey, I ask the questions because I think they're conversations that are important because we also are all different. So we all have that stress bucket, stress container, whichever analogy we're using that works best. And lots of us have got so many stresses flowing into those now that actually the thing that's missing most is turning the tap on often enough. And also remembering, I think, what is that tap that lets those stresses out? Because when we get stressed and we get busy, the first things to go are often those 5 fundamentals. Now, as athletes, I somewhat think you may be better at sleeping, eating and drinking than some people I come into contact with. But particularly what I see is the loss of movement. And by that, I don't mean training necessarily, because people will still go to the gym for an hour, but they will become very sedentary and head down in their work. And there's lots of evidence that actually going to the gym I won't preach to you guys, but going to the gym for an hour once a day actually isn't going to reverse the damage of being so sedentary. But also, when we don't move, we're less likely to connect. We're less likely to go out and see people. We're less likely to go for that coffee with that friend who can really hear our concerns. And we end up more transacting. So it doesn't take very much, actually, when all of those stresses are pouring in, for us to get that, I think you said spill, Tim, that emotional oversnap. So yeah, really important to recognize it's not easy, but we need to remember what taps out those stresses so that we can try and just keep a bit of a level playing field on it.
Just purely for the purposes of the recording, I'm just going to add in, there's a couple of comments in the chat box. So Sarah saying, I think it gives you the ability to do harder things and step out of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
And then Chris has said, he likes the metaphor of waves. So riding the waves, and when you have the resilience, you sort of zoom out and the waves are sort of within that larger space, which makes the same hard things feel achievable.
Yeah, I love it. I love metaphor. You're doing my work for me here. So why do I bring the language of adventure and outdoors into the work I do? Well, because we're human beings. So when we talk about that connection, it's connection to self and others, but also the world around us. And actually, the world around us is absolutely innate to how we're able to function and how we remember our place in the world. And when we are sedentary and our lives get a bit reduced to these little boxes in front of us, that perspective goes. So one of the easiest things I often get people to do, and I love that wave analogy, is just to imagine standing on a mountaintop for a minute and you can see for miles and just taking a breath and watching what happens because they've been holding and holding and holding. And as we hold, our lives get smaller with it. Anyway, bit of a tangent there, but thank you. And thanks for bringing those comments in. They're great. So I'm aware of time. I know what I'm like with slides. So I'll just share this because I think it's an interesting discussion. I've used it in a few sessions lately. and it just sort of brings round what we've just discussed. I threw it into a women in leadership cohort the other day, and it was like, oh, for a lot of people, you know, I like challenge, or I like things to be a little bit hard sometimes, and that's fine. I love struggling. I'm a bit like Alyssa. It does make me feel alive. What's important to recognise is that we're all different. So particularly if we have got ourselves into that position where we're perhaps comparing ourselves to what others are doing or what their lives look like, or if we're a particular personality type and we're the leader of a team, we can't just be struggling and dragging everybody with us. We need to take a view on who's got capacity, who's good at riding those waves, who can do harder things at the minute, but actually who might need some rest. So being able to take that perspective of what's really going on around us. We don't need to discuss this. It's my way of saying struggling can look like this. This was a real struggle. I've got my arms out, but you wouldn't know because I hadn't had any power for 2 days, couldn't charge anything. The biggest struggle was that Ed Milbourne had got home at least a day before me. That's a struggle I haven't got over yet, is it, Edward? The second one was great in many ways. I had that capacity, actually, when I think about it, to do the hard stuff. So I rode off into the night, had to go through a river, all the good stuff, but it also meant I had to sleep in a public toilet. And for some people, I'm guessing that wouldn't be a successful outcome. But for me, at that moment, to be honest, everything I was looking for at 2 a.m. Well, that's weird. I don't know why it's showing 2 of those. So just to bring a bit of structure to what we're discussing, has anybody ever seen this? One of my coachees might. It's Dilt's logical levels. Give me a nod or a wave. All models are wrong. Some are useful. Obviously, I like this one because it looks like a mountain. So when we begin to think about lots of those aspects we've been discussing, this is a really nice way of walking ourselves up that mountain and thinking about, okay, if I want to get to the top, what are these conditions I have to create? But of course, what's interesting about DILT, well, it's interesting to me, but is that the levels are interrelated. So if one level isn't as we need it to be, it makes it really hard to progress to the next. And what I quite often see in my work is that actually in organizations and sometimes in our home environments, we do have a lot of the environmental aspects that are supporting us. It's just a tweak. Generally, our behaviors are okay, but there are things that could be better. And we've quite often upskilled in capabilities. What's really happening is as we're getting to more that top end, which I suppose lives in the same space as Maslow and self-actualization, that gets lost. And I quite often see that it gets lost when we move up the chain into more leadership positions. And I quite often see it gets lost as people move into bigger sporting endeavors, but they've sort of lost that joy of why it was they went there in the first place. And what comes with that sometimes as well, for leaders in particular, is that identity of who am I now? Who am I now that I can't go? I had a conversation with someone earlier. She said, I can't go for lunch with my peers anymore because she's just become a director. When she was their manager, she was just managing them, managing the workload around them, managing their holidays, their diary time, their client load, etc. Now she's a director. That comes with a different identity. She sits in an office that isn't within the main room. As a part of that, they used to go walking at lunchtimes, and now the team still go walking, but she doesn't get asked, and probably because they feel they shouldn't ask her because she's a director, and she feels she shouldn't ask if she could go because they're not her peers anymore. So all of a sudden, we've got a different environment We've got some different behaviours. Our capabilities are solid, but they begin to shake around a bit because we're not quite sure. And then we get that shake at the top. So who am I? How did I get here? And then that loss of, did I want this? What's driving me? Is this the right direction of travel? So it can be really useful to go up the mountain, but also to walk back down and see what changes. Does anybody have any thoughts, feelings, or questions on that?
I guess with my endurance coach hat on, I'm then sort of turning this back into how does this apply to the endurance coaching world, and what we're doing to maybe achieve endurance goals, that maybe event goals, race goals, challenges that people have set themselves. And it's maybe you've kind of worked your way up and you've achieved different things, and then it's that how does my identity maybe change? And then it's looking further back down the mountain as you're presenting, and have things maybe changed beneath you, and as that maybe kind of shake things up a little bit. I've certainly seen that with people who have achieved a level of success, maybe gain sponsorship, even sort of people like myself, and then you kind of look back down. Has that now changed because of what you've achieved and where you got to?
Yeah.
And I've certainly seen that amongst my peers who have done similar things and achieved a level of sponsorship, notoriety, whatever that might be. I'm just kind of applying it back again the other way.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful observation. Thanks, Tim. Especially around, I like the analogy around gaining sponsors and things like that. I'll be completely honest that, when I started doing endurance sport, I didn't expect to achieve anything. I then achieved things that were for me, but as a part of that, for a couple of years, I had what I felt like people watching me, lots of people watching me in a way I hadn't had before, all the way through to that random ranking system that Dot Booster then created. And all of a sudden I was being tipped, to be on the podium at a race. And that completely blew me up because that had never been my identity as an endurance athlete. I was just Clare. I created the environment. I had good behaviors. I built my capabilities. And I believed that I could do this sport within the realms at which I'd set out to do it. But that top piece became really unclear for me quite quickly. So Alex Honnold, the climber, I remember him talking about that with some of his sponsors as well, and why am I climbing El Cap, but I think that bit was clear. But what does it change in the responsibility of it? So it's a really useful way, I think, and particularly in this top end, of thinking about if I'm doing all these things that tangibly are building my resilience, and I'm building the skill, and I might even be putting the effort in, but something's missing, or I've got that thing where I have the energy to make the effort, but I just checked out what's actually going on for me at the summit of the mountain, and is there something that needs looking at there? And walking back down and reassessing the situation. Because we know that when we're in that place and we're feeling resilient in that way, somebody on the call might recognize their words here, but it can make you feel limitless. I really loved it when they said this. I can see them smiling, because it really reminded me of when you stand on that mountaintop and you do the thing that you didn't even quite know you could do, but you created the conditions for it. And it was like the world opened up to you. Reminds me of Doctor Who when he regenerates. So we get that feeling of limitless, and it's not always so tangible, but it's really, really special. And I think that's so hard to achieve in organisations at the minute, where being authentic isn't always so easy. And if we're really lucky, we get to see views like this. I usually get a load of wows, but I'm sure as a set of athletes, you've seen things equally as wonderful. But it makes me think about that limitless ability and sense of awe that we get from doing these sports. So sometimes we know all the things that we need to do, especially if we've got a coach, but we just don't do them. And it could be that there's something at the top of the summit, or it could be that we're just sort of falling down that knowing doing gap. Has anybody seen the knowing doing gap before? Yeah, Eric's nodding at me. Thanks, Eric. Zach's seen it, probably forced it on him. So we have these two sides of the cliff. We know what we're supposed to do. We know what the problem is, but we kind of stand there. And the problem is that in that sea bubbling beneath us, there's a whole set of things that are, for want of a better term, often stories. It could be transference. So it could be something we've grown up with. It could be something that for lots of us, I think, who go and do things that aren't so normal to other people, something that in our home life or our circle of friends is stopping us doing it. It could be that we have expectations, and those might not be ours. They might be self-limiting beliefs. And they might just be these words and rhetoric and stories that we're telling ourselves, but also fear. So if I cross over, much like I see in our leaders who are developing, I'll be seen, I'll be known, I'll be heard. I might get it wrong. It might not go to plan. So it's easier to know, but not do the doing. And as I say, sometimes like Kubler-Ross, we get a bit of a Tarzan swing between the two rocks. I'd be interested, as coaches in particular, who has experience of this with athletes, and what do you think causes it the most?
I was waiting to see if any of the other coaches jumped on. Oh, Jessica's turned the mic off. Go on, Jess.
I mean, this is myself as an athlete and a coach. Sometimes you can have all the knowledge of what you're supposed to do, but when you go to do something, it's the comfort of having to either change, or what you're doing is fine and you don't want to do necessarily something's hard, or you're not looking forward to doing something a bit harder. So rather than taking the knowledge of trying to improve, you kind of just stick to what's okay, or you take this knowledge of like using social media and what everybody else is doing, and you think you can apply that. And I find that's probably one of the things I see with myself and athletes presently and historically, and then just the wider community, that they think just because somebody else is doing it, they should do it as well. But without the knowledge, it's not. Yeah, I feel like I've gone on a bit of a slight tangent from my original thought, but
no, it's a really useful thought. Thank you. So I was hearing one, that kind of comfort blanket. We're weird creatures, aren't we, as human beings? We're wired. We don't really like uncertainty. So actually, sometimes we'll keep doing stuff, even if it's a bit painful. Terrible relationships, terrible jobs. We'll stay there because it's easier, because it's actually easier to deal with the known pain than it is the unknown pain. So that can definitely really keep us stuck. And then, yeah, that kind of, I know what I want to do, but I'm basing how I think I get there on what everybody else is doing to cross the gap. And that might not be applicable to me. And when I think about that, that's something that can really affect, again, that kind of Dilt's pyramid of, if I'm not in my identity, and if I don't understand my purpose for crossing the gap, then it becomes more difficult for me to do that. So, you know, arguably creating the same environment, going to the same gym, having the same coaching plan to an extent might get you to where you want to be. But that real driver that creates that capacity and that resilience for you knowing you as a human being is missing. And therefore that fear is quite difficult to overcome. I don't know if that joined itself up or not, but you can tell me.
Yeah, and as a coach, I think it's recognizing that change is hard, and that it's okay that change is hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are almost waiting for that motivation to drive the action to get there, whereas sometimes actually the action will drive the motivation, and sometimes you've just got to get going. And people are staying in that place of safety, waiting for this magical motivation to turn up, and that's not always the case because change is hard.
Yeah, love that. Both so true. Change is hard, and yet rarely does the motivation loop start itself. Sadly, we usually have to take some kind of action, however small, to get it going. Yeah, and happily, it makes me think of the next slide. And I'm really aware of time, so don't worry, I won't run us into the night. But for some of us, we need to understand what our pressure performance gauge is. So in endurance mindset, when I talk about, what's your tolerance for risk, this is a part of it. Some people want to be leaders. Some of the worst burnout we see in particular is in managers who never wanted to be managers. Not everybody wants or responds as well to certain levels of pressure. But some of us also need that kind of kick up the butt and that pressure to cross the gap. I'm one of them. I didn't get sorted for this session until a point where I really should have been. Now, part of that comes from actually trusting and knowing yourself. But part of it is because my persona really needs that bit of pressure when I need creativity and I need to be in flow. If something is structured and it's very controlled, that's different. I can do that all day, every day of the week. But when I need that kind of adrenaline drive to level up my creativity, then I will leave things longer than they should be. Who else does this? I know there must be at least one of you in the room. Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Claire, rest assured, you're doing a very well job. So all's very good.
Thanks very much. Thanks, really kind. You can tell my gingerness is blushing terribly under this ring light, I know. So this is something I often look at with people, but not least in this environment we've got, where not recognizing that, as we said, and as a room you appreciate, stress isn't all bad. What is bad is an increasingly high level of stress and prolonged stress, particularly in the workplace. And as a part of that, that becomes normalized. And as a part of that becoming normalized, we get problems in particularly our 5 fundamentals being normalized as well. Oh, I used to sleep for 7 hours a night, but really I'm okay with about 6 now. Well, I try to have a decent breakfast, but ready meals are just a really good option for me. I used to go to the gym 5 times a week, but if I go twice, I feel like that's okay. This isn't me paraphrasing. These are things that people say all the time. They know that how icky it feels. So that identity piece again, that's sort of screaming inside people, this isn't what I wanted it to be. But because I'm under such a level of stress, it's kind of just dialing down and diminishing those human things that I need on a day-to-day basis. Oh, that got a bit serious then. I need to stay away from doing so many corporate sessions in a week. Okay. So I haven't got too much time to do this evening. Different session in itself, but if anybody has ever done any preferencing, whether that's models like Insight or DISC, Myers-Briggs, Belbin, there are a wide number of them out there that should never be used to put people in a box. The reason I use DISC is because it gives me an opportunity to help people think about, particularly if it's lost in stress and transition, who was I at base? And as a part of that, those base skills that are my opportunities are the things I do really well. But the likelihood is that when I'm stressed, they're the things that become my challenge. So this middle graph here that gets returned to me when someone does a DISC assessment often tells me a lot about who this person really is, how that gets sort of slightly changed up at work, depending on what sort of role they're in. But when they're under pressure, how it quite literally shapeshifts. As a part of that, that means they behave differently. They behave in a way that's incongruent to them. So the identity piece again, it might mean that they act out of their beliefs and value set. And that's incongruent for everyone around them as well. And I suppose sometimes we might see that if we have people who are training really hard towards something or a big event or it's new. I think that's something I can relate to seeing in families in particular, because it is a stress in and of itself, but often see it in organisational environments, and particularly when people are in long-term transformation or change. So recognising how we respond to stress, how much stress we're under, and how our best qualities become our challenges in those conditions is really key to how we retain that capacity within us to be resilient. And I'll probably just finish up around this. So I like to think and use, this is a depiction of a therapeutic model called the window of tolerance. So when we get squeezed, our window of tolerance that I want you to imagine is best kept like a set of French windows becomes almost like either one of these little Zoom screens or a post box. Imagine you're trying to, worse than a post box, it's like one that, those weird ones at the bottom of your front door. I mean, who puts them down there? So one of the things I like to do with teams is to get them to use outdoor imagery to think about what's my view? And as a part of that, where's my perspective gone? So when I don't feel resilient, what is it that I could see that would help me lower my heart rate, turn down that adrenaline and cortisol, and recognize what state I'm in terms of my stress? Because for some people, it might be hyperarousal, but for some people, it's the other way. They're zoned out, they're spacey, they're disengaged. In fact, the Gallup survey this year has come back and said, I think only 20% of employees globally are engaged in their work. Our work is a part of our purpose. It's part of the reason we get up in the morning. As human beings, we like work. So that's really, really worrying. So I like to use this model for that. And also because it gives us an opportunity to talk about awe. So if there's anything that being an adventure has given me as a gift and as a part of endurance mindset framework, it's that the reminder that people are connected to the outdoors, and that if we can get them out there, they feel better, they communicate better, they collaborate better, they renew their perspective on their lives, and particularly in the workplace. So getting them to visualize what their view is through the window can be really helpful. I'm aware we're nearly at time. So I don't know if the person whose text this is might notice it. What does success really look and feel like? When we're in that position where our resilience is low, even if we're really succeeding, it can feel like failure. And that's what I see so much in my work. And I absolutely love working with people to think about how we build back that capacity, how we come back to ourselves, how we take a breath, lower that stress reaction, understand who we are at base, reassess our direction of travel, take a good look from the top of the mountain so that Edward doesn't put you in the bin when you're coming in second at Alps Divide and you've completely lost perspective on what day it is or what country you're in. Because when we do that, we and our clients miss out actually on what it was they set out to do, and they're less likely to do it again. So I think we all have opportunity to use these aspects to help clients be reflective and resilient, and as a part of that, enjoy the journey more than their destination. Thanks for letting me ramble on. Any questions?
Thank you very much. And I'll add an extra little bit to that quote, which is, it's not about the journey, it's about the journey and the people you share it with.
Oh, yeah. Time and spaces is all in who you share it with.
Absolutely. And that's, again, part of what this is all about, sort of building the HP3 community and sharing this there. So that was brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. And